Hello, and welcome to the session, which is dedicated to the topic called Educating for Planetizenship. And let me first of all frame the conversation that is going to happen here today. So, as probably everyone in the room is aware, we're living in a very turbulent time. Ahead of us are many challenges, and if you have seen the map of global risks that World Economic Forum releases in the beginning of the year, this year risks such as climate crisis, biodiversity loss are staying at the very top. This is the concern of business and government leaders and social leaders around the world. We also are aware that our society is increasingly fragile, and that inequality and let's say cultural tensions are fragmenting our society. We see elevated risks of military conflicts everywhere. There is a major conflict happening now in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. There is an anticipated risk of conflicts between China and Taiwan, between Turkey and Greece this year. So the world is evidently shifting and to become less stable and more prone to massive disturbances. And the question is whether our society is stable enough to carry forward. And some people say that risks of societal collapse are increasing every year. So this is also one of the major risks that the world is considering. And furthermore, we are living in the situation that is called great acceleration. So year by year, things are moving faster, number of people grows, connections between us grow, and of course, the footprint of humanity on the planet grows. So we have evidently to transform ourselves, and there have been many discussions and approaches how to transform society to adapt to this radical shifts that we witness. And hopes of humanity were that education can provide a solution, that we need to learn new skills, we need to learn new mindsets. And furthermore, we know what needs to be learned. We know that there are many, let's say, types of thinking and ways of acting. If they were spread in our society, we probably would handle this kind of crisis and would move to a different stage of collective existence. But this doesn't happen at the moment. We know that we are kind of stuck in the old model of education, which is really just replicating blueprints that were created 200 years ago for a totally different situation. They're not relevant anymore. But we feel that despite all the effort to create something new, all these ideas and projects that are trying to change the situation still remain more like beautiful exceptions rather than a new normal. So the question that we hold for this session is that, yes, there is the massive challenge we're facing. Yes, we need to somehow change it, and we need to bring in the idea that we are no longer just citizens of specific nations. We are more like planetizens. We are part of this beautiful planet. We are part of the same species and part of, let's say, larger tapestry of life, more than human life, that we need to recognize that we belong to. We need to change our mindset. This has to happen on the global scale. We need to reinvent the educational system to make it happen. So the idea of planetizenship is exactly about that. And the question is, how do we make that transition happen? And of course, there have been many discussions. So let's make this session, this particular session, practical. And the question is, can we, each of people who have been invited to the session is actually a holder of some elements of the puzzle. All of you are engaged in marvelous and really important projects to disrupt the existing model of education, to create new ways of learning, new ways of being, new ways of engaging young people, adults, leaders, followers, communities. And at the same time, all of us are aware that we're still operating at a very small scale. So the question is, how do we move to a totally new situation? And just for sake of this session, let's imagine that this shift is possible. Let's imagine that we can craft a learning system that can become inclusive, global, at the same time recognizing all the differences between us, a system that will allow talents, but probably not on individuals, but also communities from every corner of the world to participate, to develop, to flourish, will allow fast tracking of people and teams with great insights, with personal and spiritual capacities that will help them, let's say, bring their values into the world and help begin working, connecting with people, with nature, with universe, and bringing their ability to act, to really start transforming the world around us. So what if this system is being crafted? What if we are part of it right now? And what if our projects are sort of elements of that puzzle that is forming right in front of our eyes? How can we make it happen? That's the invitation for the session today. And that's my framing. Let's consider this more like an open public strategizing session. Imagine that right now we are invited to do it, because I think we are. I think each of us can frame that invitation to each other. We all have resources to do it. So let's assume this is happening and let's see what we can do together. So I will hold 3 practical questions for you, but let's explore them one by one. And I suggest that in the beginning of the first round, I will invite people to introduce themselves, also to talk a little bit about the work that they are doing. And 3 questions that I have for you is, first one is about offering. Like, if we are creating a learning system like this, and if this is the system that helps activate human potential at the scale, how what do people need to learn? What young people and adults? What is the key, let's say, curriculum of that system? And who should be the target groups that should activate it, first of all? Second one is, if we are bringing this offering to the world, who are the key partners? Because we know that not every player is interested in change, and many of political and economic players just want to keep the same things where they are. Who are the drivers? Who are the key players? And finally, what are the models that make such a kind of institutional ecosystem exist in the world and sustain itself and grow? Economic models, but maybe also organizational models. So 3 questions that I think we could cover in our conversation today. All right, so we have, just to maybe briefly introduce you, we have 5 speakers today, and each of them holds, like I said, a piece of a puzzle. We have Alexander Laszlo joining us, I think, from Argentina, who is the scientific director of Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research. But Alexander is also the co-founder of the project called the Jordana Bruno Global Shift University, which existed for several years and was a kind of attempt to work with this kind of challenges. We have Gabi Arenas also joining us from Latin America, from Colombia, who leads a large educational effort for young people called TAP Foundation, to help activate their change-making potential with art. And we also have Michael Sturz, who also works with art and design and the engagement of young people, and led incredible projects in California, and now creates a new kind of educational space in Bali, in Indonesia. And we have 2 people joining us from, let's say, Nordic perspective. Lene Andersen, who leads the Nordic Bildung, and now prototypes the approach of so-called Nordic model of education, the Folkskole. And Lars Legrid, who is the founder of Emergent School, a really unique kind of learning environment for young people activating their potential for change in the world in Norway. So I welcome you, and let's hear out from each of you, your opinions. What do you think, first of all, is the offering that this kind of learning for planetizenship should focus on? What is the curriculum, and who are the people that we should work with, first of all? And I suggest that let's whoever wants to speak first, I will not I will not call you, but I just invite one of the panelists to maybe raise your voice, and then let it flow.
I would be happy to begin.
All right. Who's happy to begin? Just go ahead.
Lena is happy to begin.
Lena, please go ahead.
Because I get a little bit of a knot in my stomach whenever somebody talks about one system. I think there has to be a multitude of systems, and I think they have to grow from local experiences. And the Nordic philosophy, if I can call it that, of Bildung and Folkbildung has always been that schools should not be run by the state. For practical reasons, states have to do that because we want to make sure that all children and adults have the necessary education, which is the second thing that I would have to say. We should start looking at education as an investment and not as an expense. For two reasons. One is that we cannot afford to have uneducated people in our societies, particularly not now. And the second is that the more education people get, the more value they create in the economy. That is not the main argument, but that may be the selling argument to the people who are going to pay and the governments that need to listen. So those are my two opening remarks. And I would like to add to the first one about not creating one system, but having a multitude of systems that challenge each other, that disagree, that struggle, that collaborate, that have creative friction, that the more goals and the more we define curriculums, the worse it's going to be. I mean, we can see how the PISA tests have ruined the educational systems where they used to work. And if we add to the sort of content curriculum also some kind of emotional development and define what kind of values people need to have, then we're going to mess it up completely. So I would say begin with the children, begin with the adults. That is really the Nordic approach, which is what does each individual bring with them? What kind of talents do they have? What kind of interests do they have? Who are they as a person? There are things that we need to know everybody is going to get, such as basic reading, writing, and some science. But I would say we need to turn it upside down and think of education in a different way, fundamentally, and collaborate with the institutions that are there. I don't think it's a useful message to say that we're going to change everything.
Thank you, Lena. Alexander, please.
Great. Well, thank you, first of all, for doing this. Wow, the timing couldn't be better. And the opportunity to actually engage, not just to talk about it. I think that's what, Pavel, you were inviting us all to focus on, is what can we do? What kind of university for the planet could we actually do? And what Lena has just said and the framing that you have provided to begin with, I think are very, very informative. I agree, Lena, entirely. You know, living systems are messy. To be able to say, here's one way it works. This is Taylor's, Frederick Winslow Taylor's scientific management. And that we know that doesn't work. It's not one size fits all. So this kind of engineering the future, that's a mentality that is not only something we shouldn't engage with, it's something to be avoided. I completely agree with you, Lenin. Not to be engineering the future, but to curate it, to be gardeners, as Pavel often says, gardeners of the future, of each other, of potential, to sense into where life is. how do we have an education system that encourages that, right? That helps learners learn how to sense into where life is. So I would like to suggest that the focus needs to be not to get rid of so much of what we have in the education. Some of it needs to be pruned off, of course, but to emphasize and complement it with empathy-based learning. Empathy-based learning is not just for other human beings. It's empathy for the dogs and the cats, for the bees, for the trees. It's empathy for the water cycle. It's empathy for the oceans. It's empathy for life. Learning that sense ability is not very profound in schools at the moment. And I would like to suggest that that's very key. So let me mention just a few more things by way of opening here. My friend and colleague, I'm sure many of you know him, Tom Attlee, he says, things are getting worse and worse and better, faster and faster. I think it's just what you were saying, Pavel. So yeah, this is indeed a time of accelerating, but in a way, it's also a time of, I don't want to use the word awakening because it's being used so wrong in so many ways, but of taking consciousness of what is going on and of the pace of change. As the old saying is, the future isn't what it used to be anymore. You know, and the fact is that we don't see the future the same way, and we don't interact with what it is that is coming. There was just a conference recently on fixing the future with youth and Brian Eno and others. And the idea of fixing the future was not the engineering frame. It was fixing as not just solving. It wasn't about that. It was focusing on fixing in your sights, in your heart, in your being. And I would like to suggest that this is a time for intrepid edunauts. This is where we have to sail into educational potentials and futures. And it's a time for not bringing only the classical models, but really, for example, moving from STEM, which we've talked about before, the science, technology, engineering, and math, to STEAM, where you add arts. And I know that Lene and Lars are very big on that, and many of us here are also working on that. Particularly what Gabby and Michael are doing is very significant in this area. And so we're including, then it becomes STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. But I would like to also suggest that we add one more, calling it STREAM. STREAM, I like that because it's like a stream of consciousness. It's a stream, it's a flow. It's a flow. And STREAM, the R stands for relational intelligence. Relational intelligence. And when you have then STREAM, you add the arts and relational intelligence, you get to this empathy-based orientation. It's starting to be put into the work, but we need a veritable edupunk revolution. There's solar punk, we have cyberpunk, we need edupunk. We need to have fun in the creation of this future. And I'm just going to then end with this idea that what can we do to bring this into play? I think it's expanding our understanding with the learners, as Lenny is saying. It's focused on the learners, not on the curriculum design, on the accreditation, on the ranking. That's the standard focus in educational institutions: ranking, accreditation, boom. But really focus on the learners. What are the learners needing? And in this case, expanding our sense of interconnection, interbeing. Learning not just how to think globally and act locally, but learning how to sense cosmically, that we're part of a larger story of systemic cosmic evolutionary emergence. It's a beautiful story. How are we a part of that? And learning how to feel interconnectedly. I think these are things that education is not really promoting in these days, and I would love to see STREAM initiatives bring that into being. Okay, I spoke for way too long, but this is a little bit of my holding of these things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful, Alexander.
I can go next because
please,
I want to be part of the edupunk movement that Alexander wants to create. I'm totally agree. And I have to say, in our experience, working with many, many young people, one of the things that is important is giving to the teachers the tools to understand how they can work with the needs of the students. If we're your focus in a curriculum or a lesson plan or a very structural way to do things, when you face special needs that are so many, and I'm not talking just about educational special needs, I'm talking about emotional special needs, I'm talking about structural special needs. You can't adapt what you have to do because you are so focused, you know, in your curriculum that you can get out of the box. When you give to the teachers the knowledge and the tools and the methodologies to be sure that they can adapt anything to anyone's needs, they feel more confident, but at the same time, they are more empathic with their students. One of the things that we always think when we are trying to create new educational systems is how I focus on the learner. But the learner doesn't learn alone, you know? He needs a mentor, a tutor, a teacher, call it whatever you want. But if that person don't have the abilities and don't model, you know, what we are trying to show to the children, don't make sense. You can talk about empathy with a teacher that yelled their students. And for me, it's very important to start also with teachers, you know, and give them the knowledge and the tools that they need. And another very important part for us are the parents. When we create the system, parent has to be included. Because if you don't include the parents, every time you go to the school, teachers say, parents are the problem. And parents say, a school or university is the problem, you know? It's like they are facing the ball between them. And when you include them and you make them co-responsibles of the process, is amazing. We had an experience, a beautiful experience working in El Chocó, which is the most violent department in Colombia, one of the most affected departments by war in the world, because they have during 50 years, the guerrillas, is full of drug dealing, human trafficking, illegal minings. And right now, in our educational art center there, children are learning how to be producers, how to be photographers, how to be video artists, how to be dancers, you know, instead of being working in a mine. But that is possible because they asked us, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it. And we have teachers that have the knowledge to share with them and to teach them and to create for them a new market. That is also important because for me, it doesn't matter to create a university very focused on the well-being, the planet, and everything if you don't connect that with something that can give them the ways to live. It's like you can create something beautiful if you create a new market with a new concept of how to live, how to share, you know, which is really important. You know, I want to buy the new purse, or I want to have 1 hour with a great artist working with me, or with a therapist, or whatever that we want to create in a community. And the last thing that is crucial for me is everything that you need to create for children or young people have to include the dimensions of well-being. People need to understand that well-being is not like an abstract concept just for Buddhist people that have the possibility to pay for a retreat in India. That is not true. Well-being has many, many dimensions, you know, your physical well-being, what you eat, how you take care of yourself, you know, also your emotional well-being, your relations are crucial. Harvard University have this amazing research about what makes us happy. And the conclusion is our relations, you know, the way how we relate with others. Also, your cognitive well-being. You are not able to learn, you are not able to understand if you don't develop your brain. And brain development has many, many areas that every one of us can do, even at home. And social well-being, which is very, very important, and planetary well-being. If you don't take care of your own well-being, and you don't know how to connect with others and be empathic with others, as Lina say, it's not possible that you will understand or take care of planetary well-being. And for me, it's part of a holistic cycle where you have to include everyone, but at the same time, you need to think in everything.
Thank you, Gabi. Very inspirational. Michael, please.
Okay, well, thank you. First of all, great to be here and be surrounded by such great thinkers. I really like what everybody else is saying. I'm going to try a slightly different tact. when we were talking about this, I first started thinking about like what else is in the world that's even close to this, that approaches trying to connect, so many people around the world. And what I came up with is, I was looking at the, United Nations 17 goals that are trying to unite sort of this mindset. Not that that's a perfect system in any sense of the word, but I'm like, well, that is like at least trying to do that. And so I've been thinking about this in a way of like, how can we truly like impress, especially I'd say on the next generation, the true globalness of being a global citizen. And, there's so much, we're so much more aware of the rest of the world now than, just and when we were in school, let's put it that way. And so some of my thoughts were about just like, exchange programs, or, since everybody is so used to being on Zooms now, what if we had a international collection of students from universities and learning institutions from all over the world that was meeting like this, and really trying to, sort of have I don't want to use the word equalization, but a mutual understanding of, student experience from different parts of the world and in different situations. And then, like that the more that we can bring people from the opposite ends of the world together on an understanding, I feel like that's where the commonality starts, where we can start thinking about the planet and start thinking about our climate and our future, and break us away from all the divisions that nations and continents and policies and politics sort of divide us all up. And if, wouldn't it be amazing to have a international group of guides or advisors or coaches working with students or, users from all over the world in a format that really was talking about global issues instead of local issues, and maybe how those can then be deployed in those local means and ways. And, I remember having a pen pal in high school with someone in Italy I was writing letters to, and we'd wait back and forth. But the technology is so much greater now that we could have, young people really connecting around interesting policies about like what to do around air pollution with people from all over the world that are maybe experiencing it differently, and so forth. So, and that was sort of where my mind went. And there's, a lot of educational horsepower in this group here. How could we connect all of our networks together to bring something like that together?
Thank you. Lars, please.
Thank you for the inspiration here. I think, like you said in the beginning, Paul, we have educations that are built from a different time. And it's built from, in a cliche saying, from being human doings. How can we survive in the national state? How can we survive in the economy of the past? And what about if this is about how do we truly educate human beings to live on a planet where we basically can create a good future for all life? So it's a bit about what is the overall purpose here. And I think our chance is to go into nurturing the already amazing sides of human beings, which the current system is not doing to a high enough degree. And then there are some really practical things we can look at. It's basically still the privileged part of the world that have high quality education, right? Less than 10%. It was 6.7 some years ago when I last worked on it, but basically very few people on the planet have a college degree. And if you look at how many women are discriminated in education, it's become really severe. So how can we truly invite all communities and societies on the planet into having high quality education? Because one learning from the Millennium Conference, I was responsible for the future of leadership education. There's no doubt that what will enable the SDGs that we now have a language around will be education, because not having high quality education basically puts you in the bag of not having that much influence, right? So how can we make education universal, and how can we make it to focus on how to create beautiful human beings? Because if we are creating beautiful human beings, we will relate in good ways and we will take care of the planet. But if we are taught to have the totally wrong end goals with our striving and education, of course we create the wrong systems. So basically it's nurturing the human nature in my perspective, which correlates a little bit what you said, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to summarize, what I hear is like really we are a micro model of that diversity we are facing in the world. And Lene, I think you nicely framed it in the beginning. We cannot have one single system to rule them all. There has to be diversity. There has to be many systems. There has to be interconnections, collaborations, but maybe also some rivalry and challenging that they can bring to each other. And that is the premise with which you started. This is why we probably need to talk about an ecosystem rather than an actual system, whatever kind of system that is, which means the ecosystem would mean many species, many of them in mutualistic supportive relationship, but some of them also in competitive relationship, and it's part of the ecosystem. What I heard is that I think very important message from Gabi is that we do not only need to create new programs for learning, but we need to establish ways of being, actually. Ways of being that, especially for students, to discover alternative ways of being. And one of the ways is to say it's like a new market, but probably it's broader than that. Market is part of that story, but it's essentially what we need to create if we want to have that shift. Provide tools and not solutions. Gabi, you were also talking about this when you were talking about teachers, but I guess it applies to everyone. We heard a lot about the relational intelligence, empathy, and focus on thriving happiness as the new focus for human being. And recognizing that we are part of the planetary cosmic story. So these are like some elements that I see emerging from our first round of exchanges. And I see two hands. Elena and Alexander, please go ahead.
I'll pop up quick, given that I did put my hand up first. So let me just say, yes, excellent. And I know that where we're heading, and I don't want to take up too much time because the next part we're going to be talking about the key partners. And I think we're bridging right now also between these notions that Lars was talking about, I think wonderfully framed from the human doings. I love that, the old education and focus on human doings, really what we're looking at. How do we create people that can be productive citizens? And now we're focusing, just as Gabi was saying, so much about the human beings focus. But the ecosystems, right? The learning ecosystems. I think that's where we're going in our next step of our conversations. But I wanted to make a couple of connections also with what Gabi and Michael were saying. There is somebody right now at the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research, one of our research fellows from Argentina, is focusing on buen vivir. And Gabi, you know that buen vivir is good life, good living, but it has such a deep context and connotation in the cultures of Latin America. It is exactly what you were talking about, Gabi. And I'm hopeful that with Carla Nabriza, who's doing her study, she's right now in Europe, looking at other frames of buen vivir that bring this relationship with all of life, the flourishing of life, into our educational focus. So maybe there's a connection there as well that we can explore. I also want to mention with Michael that this idea of, how do we have these global experiences? And I'm also thinking about, we talk about planetizenship here, and there is global citizenship, which is, I even have a little passport that is a global citizen, the kind of thing. But why? Planet is, I think, more a living entity. It's important that we're thinking about this as Gaia, as a relational to a collective interbeing, this interbeing. And so I think I like that this is planetizenship, not just global, which is kind of cold. When I went to the United Nations International School in New York City, And great education, wonderful. But I think what I really learned was living and eating lunch with kids from all over the world. And the way you eat lunch is really different in different cultures. Who touches their food, who doesn't, who burps afterwards, who doesn't, and so on. And it was just curious, and we learned naturally with each other about our different customs. There was not any sense of that's wrong or do it my way. It was that kind of playing, on the roof and so on. The roof, the United Nations, being in New York City, the roof was our playground. It's structured that way. So that, I think, was my biggest education. When I went to college, I went to a smaller liberal arts school, and it felt very strange for the first semester. Something was wrong. And then I realized only after the first semester that everyone looked and sounded the same. They were all basically from America, from the United States, and very, yeah. So it was interesting, just that. And these two things I simply want to mention, the experience of, I really like what Michael is saying, bringing us into connection with each other, which we can do now also virtually and directly. So I'll pass it back. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Dana, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to touch upon something that Gabriella said about the interacting with the market and being productive. I think one of the things that started in Denmark in 1868 was implementing the Rochdale Society concept of cooperative stores. And it was very much about what could people self-organize. And I think self-organization could be a really crucial concept because, first of all, it allows people empowerment and to take their own destiny into their own hand. And it also requires less top-down control. What was interesting about these cooperatives was that they were bread stores, and they were called workers' associations. And there are two things about them that are really fascinating. One is that they came before Denmark started the cooperatives for butter and bacon. So there was the Danish workers created a market before the farmers came in and created cooperatives for the products. And the bread store cooperatives, as they grew, I'm not going to get into the details about how to run a cooperative, but the economic model is really clever because it gives everybody a little bit of spare money, and they buy locally, and they really create a local market that can grow. But they also had a rule that said that 2% of the revenue should be spent on education. And so they had study circles in their local little bread stores. And eventually they became huge supermarkets, and it's still the largest supermarket chain in Denmark. I know they have cooperatives in Switzerland and generally in Northern Europe. So from this self-organizing of some of the poorest people in the economy has grown an economic infrastructure that everybody has benefited from, and it was integrated with learning. So I think there's a huge potential here, and it's a story that we haven't told anybody, not even ourselves.
It's a really nice segue to the second round of questions, but let me first of all invite Gabby to speak, and then I'll pose my second question to you, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Pavel. I think the example that you just did is a great example on how we need to adapt what we have to do related with the local needs. I work in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa, where most of the isolated and vulnerable communities and the poorest communities are used to existentialism, not only from governments, also from international NGOs. If you want to create something when you promote self-organization, that I know is very, very powerful, because we have a few examples with indigenous communities and African American communities, you first need to create the conscious and the environment to make the people believe that they can do it. In our countries, the countries where we work, especially with people that have been refugees or has been in refugee camps, they believe that they can't, you know, if I don't have like the big dad protecting me or giving me work or giving me money or food, I can do it by myself. And I think it's an excellent example because we know it's something that works. It's something that could be very, very powerful, but needs like a stair to get there in some places. And that is a great way to understand why we can have just one curriculum on one way to do things. You know? We need to have different way to adapt us and to adapt knowledge to respond to the needs of the communities.
Great. I'm tempted to continue this kind of conversation, but I would also like to frame it a little bit and then let you continue. So Lena, can you hold your comment and maybe add it to what, oh yeah, if it's really short, just go ahead. Okay.
But it's very short. It was a pastor who started the first Danish bread sale in Denmark. So it was somebody who was local, who had more education than everybody else, and who had seen it work in the UK. So you need some first movers, but then once the idea is out there, people can start.
All right. And by the way, the whole conversation we just had here, I think is part of what we wanted to begin exploring in the second half of our conversation today, which is about who and how can support this shift. So on one hand, we hear that cooperative movement is actually the way to engage people directly in shifting, let's say, their attention to learning and creating community-based learning. At the same time, it's actually a business model. We can say it's also a business model, but because they directed part of their revenues of the cooperative to support this learning model. So in a way, probably when we think about stakeholders willing to support a project, this also will be directly related to how we frame this kind of projects. Because one way to frame it is to say, okay, let's train people. And then who is going to sponsor that? Maybe United Nations is going to provide another grant. But another way to do it is to say, okay, how can we support local projects that are social enterprises? And maybe there are investors that are prepared to support these kind of initiatives, and we'll see it as impact investing. And then the whole initiative kind of shifts to a totally different funding stream and also a totally different business model. Then talking about cooperatives perhaps shifts again into community-based funding, where local needs will be synchronized with local learning needs. And then this is again a totally different model. So let's talk about that. Both, who do you think are those change agents that are willing to step in and support education for planetizenship, and what kind of model they are willing to support? What is your sense? Because of course, this is emerging, this is a new field, there are many opportunities, but what do you think could be the best the best groups to deal with, so to say? Michael, do you want to go?
I'm gonna pass. I'm trying to think of that one here for a second. Let me come back to me in a minute if you can.
All right, Lena, please. I know Lena always has a comment.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say 3 different groups of people. I mean, as I mentioned, the pastor. All communities have some kind of house of prayer, and in many places that has at least one person who has studied somewhere else and is used to leading a congregation. And if we could collaborate with those, I mean, I'm talking about the communities, villages with the least resources, that would be one place to start. The other one is, of course, organizing workers. And I think the unions in the West really have done their job, at least in Europe, very well, and now need to focus on the rest of the world. I don't know about the United States, but we can't even keep up wages in Europe without raising the wages in the rest of the world. So we need to think globally, where we have amassed all the resources. And then there's an organization called Patriotic Millionaires in the United States, who insist that they are getting taxed heavier because they're smart enough to see that if only the rich people create more money for themselves in the economy, there's not going to be any customers. So there are really wealthy people who see the world as a connected system and who ought to be willing to pay for lifting the bottom and for investing in education, and they will have smarter customers. So that would actually, that would go together.
And I see there is also related, I think, question in the chat that we can keep in mind as we continue this discussion, as how might we address the transition between current systems and the future ones we want to create, and how we attend local individual needs while creating planetary awareness. Who would need to be part of the ecosystem besides education institutions, communities, in order for that transition to happen? Well, 3 candidates that Lene just highlighted, including religious communities, worker unions, and people interested in impact, wealthy individuals, is probably part of that story. Let's hear more. Alexander, please. And I'm not sure who, was it Gabi first or Alexander?
I did put it up first, so I'll go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead.
And then let me take my hand down here. Yeah, well, very cool. So I want to also follow a little bit on what Lenny was just saying. The systems perspective, what she was just saying at the very end about also how there's a greater sense now of our interconnectedness, our interdependence, and truly the beginning of an emergence of a different identity at the level of our collective consciousness. We're starting to see ourselves, as Thich Nhat Hanh and Charles Eisenstein more recently have talked about, as interbeings. Interbeings, not just, but it runs right in the face of all that we've learned and prepared for in our educational systems in the past, as Lars was pointing out, that really we have created people who are bent on, graduates from our schooling systems who are bent on strident individualism and self-righteous independence. I can do this by myself. I need to be an army of one. All of that kind of framing, right? And now we're starting to see nature does not work that way. It works in interdependence. It works in redundancy. It works in support systems. It scaffolds potential, as Taylor would say. Gail Taylor, sorry, as Gail Taylor would say, it scaffolds potential. So a few things from the lessons from the system thinking that we can bring forward in this, and then some concrete examples, and I'll be short. Evolutionary learning community. This is a term that we're using, has already been around for a while, for a couple of decades, but the notion of a community, 2 or more people with a shared identity, a common purpose, and a commitment to the joint creation of meaning, that is now a learning community. Okay, so they're learning something, but they're also an evolutionary learning community. So they learn how to learn in a dynamic, changing context. We're finding that we can create the conditions for communities to be evolutionary learning communities. And most of them want to do this. How do they cope with their life, their change, individually, collectively, in relation to their living environment, and so on? So this is an educational focus that is key, but there are communities that are doing this, identifying where evolutionary communities are already thriving and learning how they're doing this, rather than saying, oh, we have the models, we know how to do this, let's teach you. Learning where people are doing this. We know how to live interdependently on this planet. So finding those examples and then connecting them. When you connect evolutionary learning communities into a bigger community of evolutionary learning communities, you get an evolutionary learning ecosystem. An evolutionary learning ecosystem is comprised of communities of evolutionary learning community. And one particular, 2 more things, I'm done. One particular tool we use for this is called the CRC. The CRC is a community response circle. And the community response circle is a process by which you have a champion of a potential, a problem, but not just a problem, but challenge that they have in their community, in their school, in their environment. And they bring it to their their evolution learning ecosystem. And somebody says, oh, I'm also interested in that because I have something similar. Then they begin to study it, to learn it, and it's about learning from and with each other across the different learning communities. They each have different resources, different tools, different experiences. They don't have to wait for the government to provide the solution, for Big Daddy to come in, as we're saying before, as Gabby was saying. We don't have the dependencia. You know, they learn with and from each other in these evolutionary learning communities and evolutionary ecosystems. The CRC, community response circles, prototypes answers. Prototypes, not, I don't say solutions because they're not fixing problems, but addressing opportunities. It prototypes this in a process that they learn, and then they learn the patterns. And those patterns get fed back into the ecosystem, the evolution learning ecosystem that others then can use and draw on as well. And I hope that soon we will hear, when we move to the next section of the conversation, we'll talk about what are the platforms for supporting this. And I think we'll be able to talk about a few platforms that are specifically in place or coming into place for doing this. The last.
Well, I guess,
thing
Alexander, the time is now actually for also sharing some platforms. Let's not postpone it. Okay. Well, then let me mention that we have this, and you know about this, Pavel, this Kyung-hee University initiative, a huge initiative based in Korea, in South Korea. They have a graduate academy for future civilizations, and their interest is not having only their broader institute called the Graduate Institute for Peace Studies, but for peace impact. I mean, they want to find places which are living in harmony with each other and with the world. So there we are beginning to look at how we can bring CRCs into play and how we can identify a network of these thrivability initiatives, these learning ecosystems, and learn from them. So students learn in real living environments where people are already responding creatively in thrivable ways, not just sustainable, but anti-fragile, thrivable ways. Learn from them, bring them back to academia. So academia learns from the real world. And then the academia then informs also through their evolution of their models, the initiatives and the activities in the ecosystem. So it's really a learning exchange engine that we're seeking to foster. So that's one model. And Pavel, when the moment is right, I would love to bring onto the stage, if we could, also Tim Olsen, who is heading up one of these great initiatives from the Social Systems Lab called Co-Do. And it is about creating kind of intersection between a vocational dating and a mapping of true potentials, that initiatives in this kind of learning ecosystem where people can find each other and co-create together. So that platform, I think, is so inspirational. I would love if we have a chance to bring him also to share with us. But when the moment is right, I'll leave that to you. I think let's hear to the panelists and then maybe invite a few more people to share. So I think we have now Gabby, please, and Lars afterwards.
Well, maybe I am a little bit optimistic, but I think this is something that could be interesting for everyone. You know, Lena already mentioned different kind of church, community leaders, NGOs. Alexander mentioned universities, but I think everyone in the world, if we saw it in detail right now, is trying to find a different way to teach. If you talk with OECD, they are making a lot of research and they are trying to understand how they can change an educational system that we know is not working. And the same happened with governments and many institutions around the world. And if you talk with teachers or with principals or with networks of schools around the world, everyone is looking for a change. And I think if we open this idea of learning for planetships, is like if you open education to be more human, you know, as Lars was mentioned, and if we focus on the important things, everyone wants to be on board because we all need a change. We know it. And there's many ways to do that change. I'm a truly believer that when you change a classroom, you are changing a community. You can start the change bottom to top, or you can do a lot of advocacy to get public policies that maybe are not putting in place as has to be. That's bring me to the beginning. When we start this conversation, Lena said, just start for local examples, you know? just show what it works. And this for me has to be like an effort to start changing what has to be changed and demonstrate to others that this work and unite force. Right now in the three ecosystems that we have politicians, we have academics, we have practitioners, teachers, NGO, parents, and it creates like some kind of FOMO, the fear of missing out. I don't want to lose what is happening here, because this is so cool. Why I'm not here? And we need to create that sense, Let's go back to the edupunk. Let's go back to do education sexy, and something that is interesting for everyone. And let's learn how to connect education with everything, The kind of abilities that the companies list right now are not in the traditional education system. Let's explain to the companies why this is important. Let's explain to the government. Let's explain to everyone to create a new movement and a new way of seeing things.
What I also hear, Gabi, is the need for not just, let's say, curriculum, but different roles, including like what you're talking about is this role of kind of broker or relationship builder that can reach different domains that are currently isolated. Perhaps that's part of approach that we need to consider. Lars, please.
I had a beautiful project at one time, and that was to talk to a lot of 7-year-olds about the problems of the world. And what interested me a lot was that most 70-year-olds, they have easy answers to the world problems. Like, should we cut down the rainforest? Should we put plastic into the whales? Should we leave children to starve to death or whatever? And easy answers. And then we put people to Harvard and different organizations, and they forgot the simple answers. And I really like what Lena was saying. Maybe a solution here is not to make it state-owned. It's a model, if you really dream, to make a model that this institution, this university, or whatever we will call it, will be the first truly owned by the people of the earth. Can we make something that is so beautiful and so attractive that people naturally will support it? And it's owned by its purpose and by the things it's doing, not by national states and even UN, which is just some kind of power structure that is outdated as well. Is one way that we can create a truly universal project that all people could support, and the people that can't pay for supporting it, somebody else will step in. That's a really interesting thought. And then maybe this first thing could consist of some of the most beautiful projects we have. As you all say, there are so many beautiful people doing wonderful work, but it can't break through the limitations. Is a way that we can unite them in a way that we can see what they're trying to do and find ways of spreading them and build them into a system that most people on the planet could support easily. And I think it's doable.
Wonderful and really inspirational. And I'm just immediately my mind started to race thinking about what are those models that actually allow us to change this kind of ownership. Like, how can we create a truly globally owned learning platform that is owned by planetizens themselves? Michael, would you like to share, please?
Yeah, again, I'm thinking about systems or things that already exist that are sort of more planetary than, say, even global. And I think of the network of like astronomers or seismologists, people that are tracking earthquakes around the world. They're always working together to, triangulate what's happening on the planet, and like, how can we create educational opportunities that are that grand and interconnected? And they're doing that almost out of a need more than a desire. And so how can we take this whole antiquated educational system and sort of turn it on its head? And how can we, incentivize it that, we really need each other, that this idea, and like, I'm sitting here trying to design a new university and, struggling with how do we keep it from becoming siloed like all the other universities and educational systems in the world. and like how can we just really like turn that so that that we understand how much we need each other, from understanding like this is the one planet we have, this is our one chance, and that our future is really in dire straits, and that if we don't start working together, we're not going to have a chance. And so that need that, I feel like some of the Greta Thunberg, generation kind of has a better understanding of. And so how can we empower them to really reach across all these boundaries that are set up there? And I don't have the answer, obviously, but looking at some examples of how things are really becoming much more interconnected and out of need versus just the desire.
Thank you, Michael. And I really like this direction of where this conversation is going, to look at some inspirational cases of some attempts, let's say, to connect the world in a new way. And yeah, I will follow the invitation from Alexander to invite Tim to share about the CODO project. But perhaps other participants in the audience would also like to share some of their work that they're currently doing or would like to do. And what are your inspirational cases that you think could be part of that answer? So please, Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Pavel and Alexander, for mentioning me. I don't know how long the session is, but maybe two minutes or 3 minutes. And
yeah, 2 or 3 minutes we definitely have. We have about 10 minutes more, so
brilliant.
Let's move into this kind of exchange, right?
Okay, cool. Can I screen share?
Well,
yes,
yeah,
I can screen share.
Probably you can. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is, let me just, so I get a full view. Can you guys see my screen? Perfect. Okay, so this is a very quick demo of the platform we've been working on and sort of soft launching at the moment. It's your basic social media network. I think of it also a little bit like a Tinder for change makers. The idea is for change makers around the world to find each other. So to do joint projects, to fund projects, to volunteer, just to find each other. So the basic prompt is you recognize from Google, but this is obviously all open source and community driven. If I'll click on my profile just to give you an idea of what actually we should start with this. You got your standard profile page. You would recognize, these are links to my Medium pages or whatever. These are the hashtags I'm using, the areas I'm interested in. People can search me through these. Through them, here are all the connections on one side, and then just minimize that. And on the other side, I have like the various areas I'm exploring, so I can see like all my friends, social media style events, chat rooms I'm involved in, etc. But what is really neat, I think, and I think that speaks a little bit, I think it was Michael or Lars or both of you spoke to this idea of a planetary consciousness. And that is that we also have a map interface that I think is the most, maybe one of the most exciting things of the platform. So this allows me, if I'm now looking at all the users, I can see these are all my users and my connections around the world. I probably can find Pavel or Alexander around here, and the same thing would go for all the projects I'm involved with. If I just click circles, then that shifts to all the various projects I'm linked to, and it's a really nice visual aspect. I can see where everyone is. If I click on someone else here, let's see who have we got. Let's click my friend Linus, and then I can see where Linus is. Oops, there we go, and I can see sort of his connections, and what he's up to, and do searches, etc. And what I really like about this interface is that it is obviously a planet, and it's kind of that moment where you're reminded that we share this planet. And the idea is in the future, at the moment, we have borders. Like in the future, we'd like to do it without borders. We might want to do it with different types of map overlays, with different information layers. But the whole point is that you can, you can zoom in to wherever you are in the world. If you want to engage in a project, you could click on that project. You could then, if we should shift to the image view, we could add the different images about this project. You could read about the project team, etc., etc. We are adding functions here, so we're more democracy functions. So you can write proposals, you can make joint proposals. You could imagine having a global view where what are the best ideas in the world, and you could now use various matchmaking functions to find them and find other people who want to work on the same projects that you want to work on. And finally, we have something we call the altruistic wallet, because as this is not a for-profit project, this is an open source project, but we want to put as much money as we can into the commons, like into education, into building schools, into building new local food systems, etc., creating independence for the commons. We have this thing we call the altruistic wallet, which is basically if you donate to be part of the system, we don't need all the money we get to run the system. We can now pay that back to our members. But rather than going it back to you personally as a dividend for you to buy ice cream, it goes back into your altruistic wallet, which you then use to choose a project somewhere around the globe that you might then fund. So that's the idea of the altruistic wallet, which is a lot more advanced and complex than this is, but I don't have time to describe right now. But I don't want to take too many minutes of our time. So that was a very brief intro. I'll just post a link if you want to create profiles and play around. We have a new instance, so it's very empty at the moment, but at least you can try it. And I'll just write it down here. Oops, let me just ever so quickly. And I'll also post my email if you want to reach out and talk some more about it.
Well, thank you, team. And actually, related to that, maybe is the question that we still have about 5-6 minutes as we wrap up our session. I would welcome 1 or 2 more comments about where you think we could have, let's say, a holding space for this kind of initiative. Because what I can hear is there is a tension between the need to do locally attuned, very diverse kind of initiatives and works, and at the same time keep it as a not really under one umbrella, but let's say under one kind of framing, which would really help people to align with each other better. So what helps us move ahead, keeping ourselves aligned, but at the same time keep that diversity? Marie, I see you raising your hand, so please. You need to unmute yourself, I guess.
Hello, nice to meet you. I run a local initiative in France, in Brittany, which is called the Exploration School. And it's a school to explore the world from the sea, from the ocean. And the idea is how we can cooperate in the society between scientists, politics, students, I don't know, many people. And it's a really small school for now, because each session gathers only 30 persons. And I'm always asking how I can connect to the world. And my first answer would be that this Learning Planet Festival, for me, it's like a great time of hope, of sharing. And I was thinking yesterday, if it could be on every day, for me, it would be very helpful. For instance, if I could get back to Gabriela or Lars next week and connect following the festival, or it would already be a great start. And it's a moment of a great hope to see that everywhere in the world things are happening. So I was wondering if the Learning Planet Institute could not be the first step. I don't know what you feel about it, but that's an idea, because it's already there, and innovation is also starting from what we already have. Who is in the room? What do we already have, and with whom we can connect? So it's an idea. And another point is I saw that how we can engage in learning ecosystems, also the companies, etc. And in Saint-Malo, Brittany, we started engaging companies, but people come from companies as citizens. They're not with all the company. They're not inside the company. They come to the exploration school, and they get out of their everyday work. And this is how we, with this great diversity, we can engage them in a learning ecosystem, and then in their institution or in their company, they can drive more projects. And the same with universities or scientific institutes. They come, they see that we can learn in a different way, and then they start to implement in their own public academy. So from 30 people, we can do great things. It's the way we connect each other. So that's it.
Thank you, very beautiful. And actually that gives me an opportunity to invite you to another session, which I think is very related to what we are discussing here today. Because today we are discussing the possibility of creating that holding space, which would be more like an educational ecosystem and some kind of platform for Planetizenship. And on Friday, I think 4:30 p.m. CET, we're going to continue this conversation, discussing how we can amplify the potential of movements that are trying to bring learning, including the Learning Planet movement, which will be part of that conversation. So Mary, you're right on spot, let's say, with that, because the conversation will continue. And it's all about connecting. It's all about relations, as we heard. But what I also take from this session, and I would be really curious maybe to wrap up with 1 or 2 words from each of the panelists, like what is your main takeaway, like, and if you could express it. But let me just first say a very quick comment. I take it that we have a really rich tapestry of situations and opportunities. There are many forces that want and probably will play along. And I really love the optimism of Gabi, who claims that everyone needs it. Probably, yes, we just need to recognize that need. We need to activate it, and we need to see how we can move with that. And Lars framed it really beautifully. How can we create a system which is collectively owned by planetizens, like everyone on planet Earth, for sake of our collective futures? How can we create that system? If we can envision that, we can move into prototypes and models. Perhaps we will all find our place in that beautiful future. So let me invite each of you to share just 1 or 2 words, and that will be the wrap up of this session. Lena, maybe I will name, please. Lena, what are your 2 words? 1 word.
I would say community. Learning mostly takes place in a community. You can study on your own, but most of our learning is really about learning together, but also being socialized into a community. So that's really crucial.
Thank you. Michael?
I'd say that, like, if we could have a collective membership that, really was a connector, and, there's so many different ways to connect, but if there was like an incentive to get people to connect up and have like international hackathons or masterminds around global problems, I think that would help build the community that we're talking about and get people connecting from different ends of the globe.
Okay. Lars, please.
Dalai Lama said something really beautiful some years ago. He said, before he get out of bed in the morning, he shaped his intention. So if we could put forward a really, really strong intention that everybody could embrace about creating a system that unfold the beauty of humans and create a membership, like you said, Michael, then there might be a solution.
Thank you. Alexander. Oh, we cannot hear you.
I hate working with my iPhone. Okay, sorry. Yeah, there's this saying that we are the ones we've been waiting for. Yeah. I don't think we're waiting anymore. I think this is the group. So I think this is about we talked about human doings and human beings, what's coming together in this living, so we can be the systems we want to see in the world. I think this is the opportunity in education and in the process that we're doing now to be ourselves a learning ecosystem. We have to prototype ourselves in making this happen, coming together, connecting, and being thrivable.
Beautiful. Gabi, please.
I think we need to be better doing marketing of education and start thinking on how we can connect with the needs of people, how we can be innovative and create that bridge between these kind of examples that we know are working around the world, this hope for a future where we can have a different way of being more connected with humanity, with empathy, with our planet, with our holistic well-being, and create a huge campaign to bring people to our cause, you know, to create that needs in companies, in governments, in schools, in everyone, and start working together.
Thank you. And my 2 words I take from Alexander's first comment. I think it's time for edupunk. We need to recognize we are edupunks, and it's time to make edupunk real. Thank you everyone who participated. I think it was an amazing session, and I think it's just the beginning of the conversation. So thank you for your comments, for your ideas. Let's continue edupunking.
Fabulous. Thank you, Pavel, for hosting.
Yes, thank you. And enjoy the rest of your day, morning, day, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Great to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.